craft? UFOs. Are they real? Do we believe? Find out today on the Soapbox Heroes podcast. What's going on, everybody? Welcome. Thank you guys for coming back for our episode 3 of season 1. It is Eric here, joined by Steven. And
hello.
We have what I think to be a pretty good topic for today. I know Steven teased it with science, so I'm pretty excited for that to come up. Real quick before we go into that, and I pass over to him to give a briefing, just want to take a second to give a quick shout out to my friend over at Fractal City, as well as Penance and Hannah Houseman for letting me use their amazing music for our intros and outros you'll hear in the show. If you guys haven't yet, please go check them out. You can find them on Spotify, iTunes, and all other streaming platforms. Their programs are listed, their Instagrams are listed in the details below. If you guys do want to check them out, like I said, please do. They have some amazing music. So now after we got that through, I'm going to pass it over to Steven. Steven, what do we have on tap for the viewers and listeners today?
So I don't know if you're aware, but earlier this week, the Pentagon didn't declassify because it had already been leaked. It had already been released. Confirmed the veracity, the legitimacy of 2 videos shot of UFOs or unexplained aerial phenomena, UAPs. And I just think that's a really interesting topic because much like episode 2 where we talked about Bigfoot, this is a big deal. I mean, there's been talks about UFOs and UAPs and recorded phenomena for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So the fact that we have a major government body from one of the biggest world governments basically saying, yeah, we have video that looks like these UAPs, these UFOs are real, it's kind of a big deal. So I just think we need to kind of look and see or talk about how we feel about this whole UFO phenomenon. Are they real? Is it something that can be explained naturally? What's the deal?
Right, and so I think that a good spot for us to start that we will, talk about first. There's two podcasts that come to mind that Joe Rogan did where he talked to two very big names in this sort of phenomenon and stuff that goes on and everybody looks into. The first being Bob Lazar, the second being Commander David Fravor from the United States Navy. So the first one that we'll go over, I'm just going to do a quick breakdown, sort of like the meat and potatoes and the too long didn't read parts of the 2 podcasts, and then we can kind of discuss those. With Steven being very scientific, he'll have some good points to make him. So the first one that we talked about came out in June of 2019, which was a podcast with Joe Rogan and Bob Lazar, right around the same time that Bob Lazar had his documentary released by Jeremy Corbell on Netflix. So that one was a very interesting listen, and it holds a lot more meat now, and especially when you could take that, the documentary and the podcast with David Fravor, and you kind of compare those to the other videos released, and including these ones that were further confirmed by the Pentagon. Now, the Navy incidentally confirmed that the UAPs and the videos weren't fake in September of 2019, but last week the Pentagon actually came out and fully released it and said, yeah, this is real. It's not really fake. It's us. It's technically declassified. So the first one with Bob Lazar, just to give a breakdown, Bob Lazar, famous scientist that came out and pretty much made the Area 51 a thing. Everybody, he came out and did a interview with George Knapp. Talked about the location he was at. Now, don't be confused. He wasn't at Area 51. He was at Area S4, which is a sub part of Area 51. It's about 15 miles away from the actual Area 51 that everyone is aware of. Bob came out from working there from 88 to 89. Claimed to have worked on the craft and had worked with the propulsion system for the aircraft or the UAP or whatever you want to call it that was actually there at S4. He gives a lot of details and talks about the different ways that it worked. So like we had some notes and everything for it. To break it down, for when he first came in and was first there at S4, he got his initial briefing package. Whenever they gave him the information on the propulsion system for everything that they knew, it turned out to be accurate for what he was able to observe and talk with his lab partner and such. One thing that they do there is they do not let it be like a collective research with all the other different areas of research on the craft. So they're doing propulsion. The only person he talks to is his lab partner, pretty much. He can't compare information, he can't provide information to the other areas of research. So he researched something that what he described as half of a basketball on top of a plate, pretty much like a big square plate. When you took the top off, it pretty much turned the propulsion system off for how it was used. When you put it back into place, it essentially created anti-gravity that he's saying is the propulsion for the actual craft. At one point, he even says his lab partner was excited to show him this and said, "Here, try to touch the semicircle or the hemisphere of that the propulsion system." And when he tried to put his hands on it, he couldn't force his hands onto it due to the anti-gravity of the actual propulsion system, which he again described as if you take gravity, you flip it 180 degrees because we understand gravity is pulling us down. He was saying it was anti-grav and the fact of it was pushing things away from it so nothing could touch it or interact with it when it was turned on. So that's what we'll stop now. You can kind of give some information on how you feel about that specific description of the propulsion system, how he thinks that works, and something to keep in mind for everybody. He worked at that location from 88 to 89. So when he worked there from 88 to 89, our understanding of science is 30 years in the past. One thing he does always say is, we're not limited by anything except like our material science. So like we don't have certain materials 30 years ago that we do now. We didn't have 3D printing then. We didn't have some of the things we have now back then. So, you research until you stop and then you go, okay, we'll shelf this and then we'll let science catch up. And then once science catches up, we might be able to understand a little bit more. So I'll pass it on to Steven so he could talk about the gravity stuff and then we can, move along into more maybe description of what he said and things like that. So Steven, I'll pass that over to you now.
So when you say that the gravity, like this gravity propulsion system, it goes against everything that we know about gravity. And this isn't a modern thing. This is going back to Isaac Newton first inventing physics and first like discovering calculus. The whole thing with gravity is that it is not like electromagnetic fields. It's not made up of two different polarizations. So it's like when we look at gravity, it's always attractive. It's never going to be both. It's never going to have two different sides to it. Mass is attractive to other like massive objects. So to say that you have a gravitational field generator that is making this anti-gravity that is actually pushing away the other objects, that's just, frankly, it's a little bit ridiculous because the only possible way for you to have something that is repulsive in terms of gravitation is to have something with negative mass. And based on our current understanding, everything in the universe that has mass has a positive mass. In order to get to some sort of like negative mass scenario, we'd have to have an exotic matter that is beyond our understanding. And this isn't antimatter. I know he talks about antimatter in some of the documentation. This isn't antimatter. Antimatter is just a particle that is created in unison with a regular matter particle that is just opposite in charge and other key characteristics. But like to say that this is antimatter or something like that is ridiculous, because at the moment that it came into contact with any real like standard matter, they would both annihilate in a massive release of energy. So to say that this is some sort of strange matter or some sort of antimatter is, to me, just bogus. Another thing from that is if you have a repellent gravity, you have something that is pushing with gravity that you can't overcome, it wouldn't be that localized. In order to have something that has that massive of a gravity that you can't reach and touch it, it would have to be affecting not only you, the person trying to reach out and touch it, like Bob Lazar claims to have done when he was in this lab. You would also have to secure basically everything in the lab because gravity is a field. It doesn't just go in one direction, it goes in all directions in 360 degrees in 3D space. So in order for a gravitational like phenomenon like that to occur, it wouldn't just be him not being able to touch the thing. It would be other objects in the immediate vicinity being pushed away as well. So it would, unless it was some like strange exotic matter that we can't even begin to comprehend, it would start to push itself apart because it would have this negative gravitational field and it's wanting to remove all matter in that vicinity. Not only would there not be him being able to enter it, it would also start to vacate the air around it because air is made out of molecules and made out of matter. And based on my understanding, that would create a vacuum, which would then like cause all kinds of stuff to go wrong because vacuums are unnatural. There are very few pure vacuums in nature, and when there are vacuums created, nature does its best to fill that vacuum as quickly as possible. So everything about this is just bogus to me. And I can't wrap my head around how a reverse gravity would even work. But as you said, our understanding changes over time. We've got 30 years of time between then and now. But I want to bring up something else. You talk about science changing and all this other stuff. And another thing that really doesn't mesh well with me is you've heard him talk about this element 115, right?
Yes. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm.
So element 115 is supposedly the element that gives this the anti-gravity or the potential to mess with gravity, right? So I realized that this was in 1989 that he made these claims. But then in 2003, they synthesized an element with an atomic number of 115 in Moscow.
Yeah. So what I was gonna say was that was one thing that I had in here was he claimed, for everyone who doesn't know, that element 115 was the fuel for this. They knew that if once that was taken out completely, the actual propulsion system or the anti-grav would turn off. So when you have the element 115 in, it was stable, so it did not decay or anything like that like you would see in normal atoms. So the problem that they had was they were attempting to recreate this fuel. So when they would recreate the fuel, they couldn't get the atoms to become stable. So they recreated and they synthesized that one in Moscow. And then actually in 2004 in Germany, they were able to have, I do not remember the number of atoms of it. It was like 3 or 4. They were able to have sustain themselves for like 0.2 nanoseconds. So they were able to put it onto the elemental or like onto the periodic table, and they named it Moscovium, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yes.
So
Yes.
we created that in 2004. We were able to, moderately recreate element 115 that was giving it this, the actual fuel for the propulsion system that they're claiming. But the thing is, like with that one, when that speaks to me is, we were able, it took us that long to create that and recreate it and synthesize it, and it only lasts like 0.2 nanoseconds. When they have this other element, that's creating this amount of fuel that, keep in mind, when you have this sort of actual, propulsion system, this hemisphere, was not creating any sort of heat. So it was creating it was its fuel system and its actual propulsion system. It was creating no thermal like, where it shows in the IR and stuff like that. It was not producing any heat, which, as we know, for our general science, if thing is creating energy, it's creating heat, whether that be your phone, earphones, rubbing your hands together, you're creating energy and you're creating, that's friction, but you're creating heat. So the craziest thing for this was this element was stable. It's an element that we didn't have on our periodic table. It was creating enormous amounts of energy for something that can power a craft and something that was, the size of half of a basketball. And then also, it's not creating any sort of heat or having any sort of output of thermal, like thermal energy. So that one kind of stood out to me and was pretty crazy. Just to the fact of we have to think, not, and Bob talks about this in the Joe Rogan podcast. He speaks on where different civilizations start. So not every civilization is going to start on the same ladder we are. Not everything is going to go to steam power, to internal combustion, etc. Because when you have other planets, you have other elements. So they could have started with this element and been able to produce that, and that being their first steam engine. And then they come here and they're like, whoa, these other organisms are lighting stuff on fire, and then it's creating energy that's propelling their craft and stuff, and that might be foreign to them because they might not even have the same elements as us. So I'll pass it back to you so you can talk about element 115, because I'm not particularly versed in the periodic table or chemistry and stuff like that, and also knowing Moscovium, and knowing exactly how we have stable elements that can provide fuel and stuff like that. So I'll pass that one back over to you for sure.
Yeah, this is another one where it's ludicrous. Like, his claims are just so unfounded and so out there. I can't even begin to like justify them in my head. One of the things that I've found while I was just looking up into him, Bob Lazar specifically, is that now that there has been a element 115 synthesized, he goes back and says, no, it's the wrong element 115. And based on the way that chemistry works, once you have a atom of any kind, if it has like element 115, it gets the 115 from the number of protons that it has in its nucleus. So if it has 115 protons, it is element 115. It's the same with oxygen with its 8 protons, the same with helium with its 2 protons. Once you have a certain number of protons, that is that's the cutoff. That is what element you are. It doesn't matter what other changes you make to the nucleus. It doesn't matter what changes you make to the electrons around the nucleus. It is element 115. So for him to turn around and say, no, it's a different one, element 115, is just, it doesn't mesh with what he claims to know. All of the things that he seems to claim to know directly contradict the actual science that's out there. And even with that said, element 115, Moscovium, is supposed to be in this island of stability where these super heavy elements are supposed to be able to last a little bit longer. They're supposed to have a longer half-life before they start just decaying rapidly. But even with that, they're not supposed to last forever. The only stable elements, or the only let me back up for a second. All the elements up to bismuth have 100% stable, not going to decay isotopes, which means number of neutrons in the nucleus plus the number of protons in the nucleus adds up to whatever the mass is. So everything up to bismuth has 100% stable isotopes. From bismuth and above, everything has, or none of the elements have stable isotopes or 100% stable isotopes. They will all begin to decay until there's more created in supernova explosions, other processes that maybe we don't know in particular. But all of these are going to have some sort of radioactive component, because based on the quantum mechanics and the physics that underlie their existence, they can't stick around. They're too unstable to last forever. They may have half-lives of billions of years, which is essentially to us forever, but at some point they're going to decay into lead. All of them will, or something beyond lead, but most of them end up with a final product of lead. And it's just he says all of these things, and he talks a really good game for somebody who seems to be convinced of what they're talking about, but at the same time, none of it is actual science. It's all like something you would get from a child who's making it up as they go along. Uh, one of the things that I was watching as I was doing a little bit of research for this was kind of a takedown of Bob Lazar, and it was just like, so he predicted element 115 back in 1989. Well, check this out. Element 120, it exists. We will discover element 120. Write this down. I have just predicted element 120. You know what it's going to have? It's going to have 120 protons in its nucleus. I've just told you one of the properties of element 120. And I am the sole person who has predicted that. I can't tell you any of the properties because we can only make a few atoms of it at a time before it decays in nanoseconds. But at the same time, it's like anybody can look at a number on the periodic table and go, well, I bet at some point we will be able to make this. It's just, I can't wrap my head around any of his claims. They're just so ludicrous and so out there.
I guess the one thing I could think of for that is just, we have our understanding of elements here on Earth. We, and maybe other samples we've received, that we've gotten off of other planets we've been able to send expeditions to. But, like my thought process for that is just, if we knew all the answers and knew exactly how it was different, how it was able to fuel that stuff, it wouldn't really be like a debate or a conversation or people poking holes in his story or him trying to prove, that stuff existed because, we could just look at it and go, oh, it's this, we'll just, we'll recreate it, we'll synthesize it, we'll do something, maybe there are other elements to it, not being, periodic table elements, but there are other elements to the science. Because if you have to think, if this thing came from where they had in the briefing package, now it could be disinformation, but where they have in the briefing package that the craft came from the Zeta Reticuli star system, from the third planet in the star system. That's like 39 and some change light years away, if I'm not mistaken, or 38 and some change. So you have to think, if something can travel from that far to here through the vacuum of space, through all that, and get here, their science might be at a different understanding level than ours is, or we might be on the same level for what we're based on by each planet and stuff. But so right now we've looked at the propulsion system, we looked at the fuel for the propulsion system. So the next thing I want to talk about is actually the craft itself. So he does come and talk about the craft. He was able to go in it a few times for them to do research, tests and stuff like that for their propulsion system and how it actually was used inside of the craft. So a couple things he actually talks about are different elements of the craft itself that make it stand out from what we do and do not use in our own, and things that we have and don't have. So the first one being, of course, the size. So the size of the craft, he says, he's 5'10". He says that he couldn't really stand straight up inside of the craft. It was made for something not extraordinarily smaller than him, but something definitely in smaller stature than he was. When he's inside there and the actual outside and inside of the craft, he said there's no edges. He said at the time, the way that he would have described it was, the ship was made out of wax and it was slightly heated until it melted and kind of formed together. To where there was no edges, there was no panel seams and stuff like that. That's how he would have described it. Now he would have said the entire ship was 3D printed. So, that's just another example of how we've come along in science. From before, he said it's made out of wax and melted. 30 years later, he'd say looks like we would have been 3D printed to where there were no panels put together. So he moves on to talk about the internals of the craft. When you actually hook up the propulsion system itself, there's no wiring in the ship itself, so the actual power for the machine comes from the hemisphere on the plate, as he would call it, that he puts into the ship in the center console, around the couple seats that were there. There were pretty much two things he can kind of wrap his head around. He said all the rest of the stuff, it was kind of extraordinary because there's no way he could, describe it for the way that things work. But there were two things in the craft he said there was. One of which being the hatch going down to lower level that had the actual system itself that utilized the what he call anti-grav to propel the craft. He, for lack of better term, said they looked like trash cans on poles that were three of them hanging down in the bottom part of the ship. The actual like the hatch itself to get into it, he said was really cool to him because he could actually understand it. So the hatch, he said itself, and this has nothing to do really with what we're talking about, but I thought it was pretty interesting, is when you take the dividers out of a 6-pack of like bottles of like, soda or beer or whatever, when you stand and you put your hand directly on the top of it, it's going to hold up that weight. So like you can put your hand on it, it's not going to collapse it. So that panel, when it was closed, the hatch, you could walk on it and whatever. But if you've ever like flipped that on its side and like, you put your hand on it, it collapses. He said it was similar to that because there was a small spot you could put your finger in and pull it, and it was like a honeycomb, and it actually collapsed the hatch down to actually get into the next zone. Now, that's nothing special. We could recreate that, but I think that was funny because that was one of the few things that he said was crazy to him, because that was something we actually could create, while the rest of the stuff looked like things that, we couldn't. And he didn't know as much about the craft as, he could, because where they kept everyone's research separate, the actual way or like what the craft was made of was not part of his division. That was the metallurgy position. So like he had no idea about it and couldn't ask those questions about it. And then the other things that he talked about were there were actual walls. There were no screens in the ship itself, but the walls, some of them, whenever the power was on in the craft, it could be turned on and one of the like actual walls would go translucent. So that's something he said wasn't really that fancy. We have that now. It's called smart glass or liquid crystal. So that's something that we have now. We didn't really have then, but we do now. So that's something now that's not very, outstanding or stands out to him, because we were able to reproduce that sort of. Maybe not on that scale, but we were. But the bigger thing about the ship was when they actually pulled them out to be able to watch the test flight of it, like moving in a couple different directions and touching back down. So this is something else you can speak on. So what we had an understanding of before in the past, at the time when he was doing it, was gravity was produced by particles or gravitons. We were recently able to find that gravity waves do exist. We were actually just talking about before we started the podcast of saying, they move at the speed of light. But the main thing is they talked about gravity waves existing. So when they were test flying the ship itself, because of how gravity waves that we know now work, it actually, if I'm explaining this correctly, I'll continue. If not, please interrupt me. But it pretty much, gravity waves bend light, radio waves, stuff like that. So when there's actually the waves out, we shouldn't be able to communicate with radio waves into someone inside the ship due to the gravity waves, correct?
Not necessarily. Gravity can bend light like that, but from my understanding, the like gravity waves in that capacity, like it's just a stretching and shrinking of the actual like material of space-time. So like as a gravitational wave is traveling through space, it's just kind of like subtly stretching and compressing the actual space, like the underlying fabric of reality, the space-time, rather than it being what we think of as a wave, or like it being uh, able to really interfere with the light itself. Like if you remember when we discovered gravitational waves, that was done using two giant detectors in the LIGO experiments.
Hmm.
And what they were doing is they had mile-long laser beams. And they had a mirror that was angled at like a 45-degree angle to these two different mile-long laser beams. And as they were lined up so that they were in phase, so it was basically an additive thing. They were passing through the mirror and onto a detector, and it was adding up as this one more powerful beam. But as space-time was subtly stretched and shifted, it wasn't like cutting off the light or like blocking any communication. It was it just put it out of phase. So there was a little bit of a darkening effect. It was just kind of bumped out of alignment. So it wasn't as bright as it was before. It had a darker final image.
Gotcha. Okay, and that's because the reason why is when we talk about that is when he talks about the craft actually going, they were able to communicate with someone inside. But he said that from what they understood at the time, using the radios and stuff that they had, that should have been impossible with the amount of envelope of the anti-gravity it was producing, that it would actually reflect the radio waves away from it. And the same thing that he said pretty much, and I bring that up because this is an interesting conspiracy or like theory that comes to mind to me, is also when it talks about bending light, if the gravity waves are strong enough to, lift this ship, make it move, propel it, make it able to actually fly, those gravity waves would reflect the light. So he said, if it's strong enough gravity waves and you were to look up, technically it would warp the light to make it to where you really couldn't see the ship. Is that, like, how accurate is that?
That it's somewhat accurate because, again, like, we think about if you've seen the movie Interstellar, you see Kip Thorne's like interpretation of what light around a black hole would look like. It has that kind of warping effect where it looks like you're actually seeing the light from behind the black hole in front of it. We have actual confirmation of that, where we had, I guess it was 2 or 3 years ago, the first images of black holes where it shows that little ring of light
around it.
Yeah. So a super, super high gravitational source could do that. But again, if we're talking on the scale of black hole gravitational pull or push, like, we're talking about mass destruction. Yeah. Like, if we had a black hole that was able to warp the light of, say, the sun here on Earth, we're talking mass destruction. Like, what Earth? There is no Earth. And as it gets bigger and bigger, what solar system?
Right.
It would just rapidly spiral out of control, I believe. And then if we're talking about anti-gravity, so kind of like a white hole would be the opposite of a black hole, where it's just spewing out matter and being 100% repulsive in terms of gravitation. If it's also powerful enough to bend that light, then we're looking at something that isn't going to just hover in space. It's going to
destroy anything around it. Right.
Yeah, okay. It's going to disrupt clouds. It's going to disrupt the air. It's going to disrupt the atmosphere. It's just going to be massively disruptive.
See, and I'm wondering, thinking about it too, the propulsion system being on such a smaller scale compared to the black hole, I didn't know if that depended on, the actual size of the source of the anti-gravity he talks about. But the theory that makes me think is, maybe we don't see these craft and stuff as often because if they're using anti-grav as a source of propulsion, you can look up in the sky and not see it because it's bending the light waves around it. So, like, my theory was just the thinking of, well, we don't see more UFOs because they're propelling themselves anti-grav and it's like a natural cloaking device. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, and on the topic of cloaking devices, we do now have, like, there are things that we're testing in the military and in some other, like, fields where it is kind of an active camo or an active cloaking. Like, there's the suits that they have.
Yeah, they have the cameras on the back, TVs on the front, or whatever that show behind them and put it on their front. Yeah.
So it's like an active cloaking. So it may be, just to kind of give a point, it might be that it's not the anti-gravity that's cloaking them. It might be that they, if the UFOs do exist, have perfected that technology, right, which to me makes a whole lot more sense, because taking some sort of video of what's above you and projecting it downwards and taking a video of something that's below you and projecting it upwards just makes a whole lot more sense to me than us not being able to see it because a massive gravitational field is just hovering above our heads at any given time.
Right. So I just thought that was a funny thing to bring up for the theory, because if it works the way that they talked about, that would explain why we don't have more sightings or more proof and stuff for the videos and everything. Yeah. It's like your eyes literally can't see it. Looking at that one that's the science of these podcasts we talk about, where he talks about, how the ships work and everything. The next one we're going to talk about more is like the actual visual proof that we had, what we kind of, talked about at the beginning where he introduced the topic of, the Pentagon confirming and releasing the video of saying, yes, this was not faked. Again, the Navy accidentally did that last year, but the Pentagon finally came out, put their stamp of approval, and said, yes, these
And,
did happen. So the one that I'll
and
talk
what
about,
Travis Baker, the one that bringing this all to light.
yeah, right. So what we're talking about next is the other podcast that I had mentioned in the beginning, which is the podcast where Joe Rogan interviewed Commander David Fravor. So the video that was actually released by the Pentagon is labeled as the Tic Tac video. A lot of people know that one's a popular one. The gimbal video is a popular one. And there was also another couple that like the Mexican Air Force had taken. There's another one off the East Coast that they had of one of those, what appears to be a Tic Tac flying across the water. But the main one we're going to talk about is the Tic Tac video. So Commander Fravor was he was at the time was an O3 in the Navy, if I'm correct. He was in the Navy. He wasn't a commander yet, but he might have been. I'm not. Don't quote me on that one, but just from what I remember. So it was in November of 2004. They were off the coast of California. They were doing their workups to go on a deployment to the Persian Gulf. So they were getting all of the actual battle group together, being the support ships and stuff like that was around the actual USS Nimitz. The USS Princeton was the cruiser that was with it that operated the Aegis systems, really utilized it was like the command and control center, for lack of better terms, for the actual air group at the time for them doing their exercises. So they were doing an air defense exercise where they it was a 2v2. They send two jets out further away from the carrier, and then they send two more jets up and they do like an interception to make sure they can't actually get to the carrier. So the two jets from the United States Marine Corps took off. They were going 100 miles south of the USS Nimitz. Fravor and his wingman was actually going up, and they were going to go to a cap point 40 miles south of the Nimitz. Then they were going to intercept, just doing a 2v2. So after they had taken off, they were almost to their cap point. They got a actual radio in from the USS Princeton and said, hey, we've been monitoring these things coming out of the sky for the last 2 weeks. They are dropping down from 80,000 feet and going to 20,000 feet or below, hanging out for a few hours, and then they're going back up. So the reason why the 80,000 feet is important is because that's higher than the actual radar systems and the satellites can pick up. So if it's above 80,000 feet, you're not going to see it. So they sent him on an actual real world vector to 60 miles west of the carrier. So when they get out there, things that he notated, and this, you have to remember, this is someone, he was enlisted in the Marine Corps. They sent him to the United States Naval Academy. He said in his own words, he had all the qualifications you can have in a jet, even ones that they don't have now. So he went to Top Gun school. He did all those things. So he had a lot of hours in, jets. He had 4,000 hours, he said. So things that he notated was they were going at 20,000 feet. It was clear skies, calm water, no white caps, nothing. If you've ever been out on the ocean, those happen. I've taken cruises whenever you have no stuff in the sky and it's clear waves and it's clear ocean, you could see as far as your eyes literally can see. So when they were at 20,000 feet, they saw wave breaks on an object in the water, which he described it was more of a cross-shaped object. And it was facing east to west. He said it was the size of a 737, which is, a commercial airliner. That's when they noticed the actual Tic Tac object radically moving around the object in the water. It was facing, point of the Tic Tac to the other point was facing north-south. He said it was about 40 feet or so in length, which he knows that because, he said he spent a lot of time in the air, seeing other jets in the air. So he said it was around the same size as his aircraft was, which was a F-18 Super Hornet. There was things else he notated when he was looking at it from the bird's eye view at 20,000 feet was there's no rotor wash. So there was no rotors at all. As he began to descend, he left his wingman up at 20,000 feet. He began to descend in a clockwise, manner to slowly descend because he says, when you're above the ocean, you can't see anything for reference. Ocean looks the same at 2,500 feet as it does from 20,000 feet. So if you descend very quickly, you can make a mistake and accidentally, hit the water, or, do something you can't recover from. So he said, as the object turned, it raised up to actually come up to meet where he was at when he was descending. And it started to mimic what he was doing in a circle to kind of stay on the other side of the clock from him. So the quickest way that he said, that you get to something when you want to get there is you point your nose towards it, you turn, and you just go right at it. So he turned and he crossed the circle to go at it. And he said as he got in front of it and it pulled in front of where his nose was so he could get closer, he said it literally was half a mile away from it. So that's, what is that, like 1,200, like 1,200 yards?
2,007 feet.
Yeah. So he's not very far from it. And he said as it came across his nose, it just vanished. So like it came across going from left to right and it just vanished. After that, he radioed back up and said, hey, do you guys see where the object just went? It's gone. I can't see it. And they said it's gone too. We don't see it either. So they doubled back. They went to the actual object in the water and there was nothing there. So whatever the object was in the water went back underneath the water, did whatever, it was gone. So then after that, they were going back up to 20,000 feet and they got a radio in from the USS Princeton and said, hey, the object that you were chasing is at your original cap point, which was 40 miles south of the Nimitz, 60 miles from where they were. And that radio signal, he said, came in within 30 to 40 seconds. So in the radar systems at the time, they did like a sweeping pulse. So it's not like an instant track, it's a sweeping pulse. So every 30 to 40 seconds, it's going to hit that grid. So that object went from 60 miles away to the other cap point within that 30 to 40 seconds of that radar sweep actually hitting the blip. After that, they did not have a FLIR pod on the actual craft. So when they got back to the ship, the next group took off and they had a FLIR pod, which is a forward-looking infrared receiver, something like that. I'm sorry if I probably have that wrong, but that's okay. So pretty much it's an infrared camera. So they took off from the Nimitz, went out to try to find the object, which is the actual video that you see that they released was from that aircraft tracking it with the camera. So the main thing that's important to keep in mind about that one is when you're watching that video, there's a lot of stuff on the screen that doesn't make any sense. But the main things to keep in mind are the radar could not lock on and track the object because of active jamming. It was not passive jamming, like it was actively jamming the tracking signal from the actual camera and the jet itself. When they have the infrared video, which was black hot, something you can notice is there is no heat from propulsion at all from the thing. It's literally just hovering there. All you see is a small little envelope around it of an aura and then nothing else, which from everything we know about our propulsion systems, anything that creates energy or propulsion is going to create some sort of heat. You'd be able to see that on there. You could look at jets taken in those. You could see the heat coming from it. And then also when the object actually moves right to left off the camera, it moves so quickly out of the field of view that the camera cannot keep up with it when it's turning, which is extremely difficult to do considering the object is hovering and then it goes straight into a motion so quick that the camera can't keep up with it, which is something that nothing that we have on this planet can really do in regards of acceleration. And then again, there's no heat signature from the acceleration and stuff like that. So to put something in perspective that we do know, an SR-71, which is a Blackbird, which is the fastest jet to ever exist pretty much, it could travel at Mach 3, which is roughly 35 miles a minute. Eyesight visibility on a clear day is roughly 50 miles. So when those are taking off and going full speed away from you, you can technically still see that jet for roughly a minute or so. But when they originally looked at the object traveled and went away and disappeared within 1 to 2 seconds. Like you literally could not see it trailing away into the distance or anything like that. So that is the other side of the perspective we have. We have, someone saying they worked on them and the science to them. Then on the other hand, you have the actual eyesight of someone in the Navy. We have the video. We have the confirmation that no, this wasn't fake. This was actually something that came from one of our craft in 2004. So hearing that, and especially something that I wanted to bring to your attention that you might be able to touch on, Stephen, is in the documentary when Bob talks about how the ships would actually travel using anti-grav is if you're holding up a piece of paper and you're going from this point to this point, the easiest way to get there is not a straight line. It's to actually fold the paper to bring the points together. So when you have something traveling at, like you said, the speed of light, would that be possible for that thing to literally just, bridge that gap and move 60 miles in that short amount of time frame for you not to even be able to see it if it's propelling itself like that? Or
Now, I don't I don't believe so. In order to like the folding the piece of paper, like this is something that has been in pop culture fairly recently. In Stranger Things season 1, they talk about in order to go from like the real world to what they call the upside down, you would have to like make a wormhole and pass directly through space. That's the only way. I mean, it's the only theoretical way that I know of that you could do a quick travel like that. But again, the amount of energy that it would take to make a wormhole and keep it open for the amount of time, even if it's only 30 seconds, to keep a wormhole open based on what our understanding is of wormholes and how we would be able to manufacture them and actually use them for travel. It's such a ridiculous amount of energy that uh, it would be again super destructive. Now that being said, watching the video footage of these declassified UFOs, like I will I will dump on Bob Lazar all day because just from my perspective, none of the things that he says line up. None of the things that he says match up with known science or like any credible source. Like education is one thing that is kind of sketchy with him. All this other stuff, but this video evidence, I that's one thing that I can't like try to explain away. Uh, there's been there's been talk in the past of, well, what is what is this UFO, because we know that it has to be something man-made. It can't just actually be a foreign object from outer space or whatever. Like the video footage, like you said, there's a there might be a little envelope where this thing itself is showing hot or glowing hot, but there's no propulsion trail. There's no means for it to be accelerating. So the video footage, and especially now that it has been declassified and basically confirmed by the Pentagon and the U.S. Navy as this is a thing that happened. This isn't just anecdotal evidence, or it's not just somebody who's talking to be talking. Like, yeah, this is the kind of stuff that, even though I'm still kind of skeptical of extraterrestrials or a more advanced species being able to travel directly here, the video evidence shows that it's a craft that we don't understand. Like you said on uh, the video you were describing, this object goes from a dead hover to accelerating out of the frame at a rate that we couldn't keep up with. So if something is capable of reaching those kinds of speeds at that rate, and it's documented in uh, government released and like military released video, I don't I don't think that the United States government is going to be like, yeah, we're going to go ahead and confirm that this is a thing. Uh, if it indicates that we've encountered something that our craft can't touch, our craft can't even get into the realm of like competing with in terms of speed or maneuverability. Like unless it was something that is uh probably legit, I don't feel like the United States military would be like, yeah, we're not as good as this.
yeah. And I mean, the one thing you would think is, I mean, the main thing about this is the thing goes from a dead stop, or especially whenever he's witnessing it with its eyes, it travels as far as it did faster than any known thing on this planet can. Like even the SR-71 can stay tracked in a radar. It can be locked onto to find the range and actually hit with the FLIR to where it will stay locked onto it. But the main thing is that this one is they couldn't lock it, they couldn't find range, they couldn't get the camera to track it, they couldn't see it on radar, actually scanning it because it was being jammed. So that's some big things about that. And one thing to know, like if something, it is actually technically it's an act of war to actively jam a radar signal or anything like that. In international law, it's an act of war. So that's something just to keep in mind, that they couldn't find the range on it, they couldn't do anything like that. And then it brings us to other videos that have released as well, either leaked or been provided by the Pentagon. The other one being the gimbal footage, which is the one that shows the actual craft that's more like a saucer. Um, it's tracked for roughly a minute and a half or so, and then it tilts and faces like belly up. So one thing that's interesting about that is in the Bob Lazar, the documentary and stuff, and in the podcast as well, when he talks about how they actually fly, the craft will actually like hover like you'd normally see one from a movie or something hovering. But when it's actually traveling at a significant rate, it actually flies belly up. I don't know why, but that's just how he and everybody says it does. And if you notice in the footage, that ship actually, or the craft, rotates to face belly up, before it actually goes out to where it can't be tracked on the camera anymore because it flies away. Um, Something, whenever you think of this too, is whenever you have something that can fly like that, when something, and the way that Commander Fravor describes the actual craft over the water in the Pacific was, it looked like if you had a ping pong ball in a glass and you're just bouncing it around, like that's how the ship was actually, or the craft was actually moving. So like, one, you have to think, like, if something's moving around that fast, like what we would have right now, like we're getting beat up. Like, unless like we're in something that's actually providing our own stabilization inside of whatever it is, we're getting beat up inside of it, like it's going to throw us around all over the place.
Yeah, think like a hamster in a hamster ball that's been rolled around or just thrown around or ping ponged around places.
Right, and then the fact of that is too, it's doing it unimpeded, so no wind. And another thing that they talk about too is off the East Coast, when you had the ships or the craft that they were saying that looked almost sort of like cubes inside of a clear beach ball from its aura. Um, when you're up in the air, when you're at 15,000 feet, when you're anywhere up in the air, actually, if you've ever flown on a plane, like there is wind. There's plenty of wind up there. So when you have something that's just hovering in the middle of nowhere and is moving around like that unimpeded, and it's not affected by gravity, it's not affected by air, it's not affected by anything, like that's something else that we can't explain, because from what we know is anything that has any sort of mass, planes fly because wind gets underneath the wings, and you pretty much you coast on top of wind and air. When you have something that's moving around unimpeded like that, that's also something that we can't really explain. And I think that that's pretty crazy too, that, something of that size cannot have a propulsion system showing on IR. It can't be tracked. It's moving so fast that the cameras can't keep up with it in its field of view. It can't rotate fast enough. And then also on top of that, it's literally unimpeded by anything that we have. So I think that is something that's pretty crazy. And then another thing in regards to that, you're moving at that high of a speed, you're making those sort of maneuvers. What we know about fuel right now are, when aircraft go up, they roughly have, even stealth bombers. Stealth bombers can only fly for roughly, an hour and a half or 2 hours before they have to be like refueled in the air so they can continue going. Like these things were going from 80,000 feet down to 20,000 feet or below, chilling out for 3 or 4 hours, and then going like back up. And like, there's nothing that we know as well that uses a fuel source that can fly, stay up, perform those maneuvers, move at those speeds, and then just casually go back up like no big deal. So I think that when you look at these, when you have these videos, those are the ones that are even harder to look at and look from a scientific level, because our understanding of flight and our understanding of technology is not at that level to where we can even think of reproducing something like that.
Yeah, yeah, and even like my kind of skeptical take on it is, I want to, at the same time, I said a minute ago
Thank you
that
so much for the follow,
um,
Happy Bunny.
the
Thank you, Cass. I
military
appreciate
wouldn't
it. Thanks for
be
stopping in
like
today.
going out and saying specifically, hey, we've got this threat out there that we can't do anything about. Like we are in trouble because they are so vastly superior to us. Like the skeptical side of me wants to go, maybe, just maybe, this is some other form of clandestine military operation, or they're doing tests, or they're testing out something, because if you look at kind of the history of uh, technological advances, at least in terms of like US led technological advances, I'm thinking GPS. GPS was originally used by the military as like a positioning system. And over time, as it was released or as it was like discovered that, hey, the military has this capability and this kind of technology, it was released into the world and given to civilians to use as well. Same things with like some early internet prototypes like ARPANET, which was DARPA's little in between network that they could use to communicate between sites. These things gradually trickle out into mainstream society, into civilian society. Uh, while I can't explain away the actual videos, like, yeah, this is a craft that has no sort of propulsion, no sort of energy release. It itself is hot, but beyond that, there's no like fuel trails. There's being able to stay fueled for large amounts of time, or in some scenario, maybe they're not even running on a conventional fuel that we know of.
Right.
Maybe there is some sort of anti-grav or something beyond our
Like
understanding.
an indefinite fuel source.
Yeah, but it's like maybe at the same time, this is kind of the United States flexing on everybody else. Like, hey, this is something that we need to look out for. Oh, and by the way, it's us.
Yeah.
And in the future, it comes to light, kind of like the what was it, the B2, and there's another the uh, stealth fighters and stealth bombers that before they were released, they looked otherworldly, or before it was like widely recognized that they were a thing, they looked like something out of this world. They were very flat. They kind of had a pancake shaped design to kind of deflect all those radar pings from from like hitting and reflecting back. So it's kind of a double edged sword. Do you sit here and think, well, yeah, absolutely, the United States government is showing us that there is a very real, very credible threat of something we don't know, or is the United States government saying, hey, for all of you who don't believe that we are still the most superior technological military on the planet, here's what we've got.
Yeah.
But
See, that's so hard for me to think of in that way, because this sort of technology of like if we had on Earth, no matter what country came up with it, would be so life changing and groundbreaking for for our civilization. Not even just for us, it would be for everyone. So like if we had the ability to travel unimpeded, which at the same time you think if we're able to travel unimpeded by the air, as long as that craft is sealed and it's watertight as well, we would technically be able to travel unimpeded through water, through any sort of environment that we wanted to. I think that that's so hard for us to grasp and think of it that way. And of course, future answers all questions. But when we look at it like that, that would be so groundbreaking for us to have in a technology, to the point to where, like GPS is a military thing, and that's different and all this stuff like that. But the fact that that would be only military based would be, I just think that would be so crazy to not have on a global scale. If you think about it in a movie sense too, like Independence Day, the first one came out in the 90s. The next one they released is like, 20 years later, if that would actually happen. And the next thing you know, we have world peace. We're building a base on the moon. We have F-22 Raptors that are powered by the same sources that the alien craft were, and they're able to travel through space and do this without any sort of special, characteristics of the actual craft. I think that like that sort of thing would be so groundbreaking. It would change everything. Just as like the nukes.
yeah,
The United States, Russia, and Germany were all trying to develop the nukes. We found it first, and then it created an arms race of, okay, well, United States now has nukes, and that's very unbalanced. So now everybody has to come up with them too, so we stay on an even playing field.
right.
I think that that's the same sort of thing if we looked at this and being in regards of this was the government making it or whatever it might be. I just think that that's so out of our understanding for how we generate energy and how we are able to propel craft and propel things like cars. like right now we have self-driving cars, but like we don't have cars that run on an indefinite fuel source and ones that can travel. Even a Tesla, even a car that powers on only electric, does have a thermal. Like if you look at it in IR, you're going to see a thermal trail of heat to where it's propelled. So
Yeah.
like this is just crazy to me because the thing takes off, it floats, it hovers, it moves, and everything like that. And doesn't have any sort of that IR. So um, this was a fun, definitely a fun podcast to research. I had seen those podcasts again, but honestly, I can listen to them over and over again and watch those. I'm a very big space oriented person. I love space. I love all the things that come with it. So this is a very interesting podcast for me. Um, it was super enjoyable. I'm at the end of my stuff, and it puts us right at an hour, which is perfect timing. Now,
It's
what I
great.
do what I do want to do before we actually sign off, maybe talk about, I don't know if we even have an idea for what the next topic is going to be, but I want to pass something over to Steven. He's going to talk to you guys real quick about a giveaway that we have, that we want to pass along to you guys, that you guys can look at. So I'll pass it over to him real quick.
So we've been asking. This is our third episode. We hope to do many, many more because I like Eric said, I have a good time doing the research on this. Both of us really like to argue, and both of us like to kind of be like we're the one that's right, and finally come out on top. And we've asked for suggestions over the past two episodes. If you're watching live here on Twitch, then you can drop any of your suggestions just down. There's a little widget down at the bottom. If you're listening to this on our audio, then you can go to our hosting site, anchor.fm/the-soapbox-heroes. And there's actually some place where you can drop in an audio request. So we can kind of include your question in audio form in the intro. But what we want to do, I've got right here a sticker of our logo. And what we would like to do is, if you suggest a topic and we choose it, I think we would like to send stickers to people who have given us something to think about and given us something to debate and to talk about. So if you want to suggest some sort of topic, you can just drop it in the box below, or you can send us a message. You can also get in contact with us on Twitter. We are at, I think it's the SBH podcast on
Right.
Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do that. And if we choose your topic, we'd like to have a way to get in contact with you. So we could send you a DM, get your information, and get you a sticker sent so that you can rep this podcast, and hopefully we can grow it a bit.
Right, and I think that's pretty cool for you guys to submit to the suggestions to us, because you guys are the audience. We want to know what you guys want to hear. We like talking about stuff. We like talking about pretty much anything. But if you guys have ideas of things that you would like to hear, we'd love to hear it. And especially being able to send you guys a sticker and stuff like that. It's cool to be able to do that. To have a podcast like this and have that ability to send those out and do those. So
Yep.
like you said, please, get in contact with us in a couple ways that we have. Please leave us some suggestions, and then we can get in contact with you to send the stickers. But yeah, right now I don't have anything for us for what we're going to do the topic, so I guess it's going to have to be a surprise for you guys.
Yep. And it will not be next week. Next week, Sunday
Correct.
is Mother's Day, so spend time with your moms. Take her out to a nice dinner, or just do something around the house. Give her a call if you don't live with her or live near her. Just show a little bit of appreciation. So no show next week, but we will be back in 2 weeks with maybe a suggested
Yeah.
topic.
Yeah,
Maybe
maybe
we'll come
so.
up with something.
Hopefully so. Yeah. So we'll start doing our due diligence to try to figure out a topic for you guys for not this coming, but the next following week, and then after Mother's Day and everything. So we will take care of that one and have that done. So I think that's going to do it for this podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed. Please make sure, if you guys haven't, to check us out on our YouTube, our Twitter. Please, make sure to give us a follow on Twitch. And then also, we are doing our audio podcast that upload at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays following these the Twitch streams of the podcast. on Spotify, iTunes, Overcast, Google Podcast, Anchor.fm. All of those wonderful sites that you guys can listen, subscribe to, and be able to hear us audio while you're driving, doing whatever you need to. So please check us out on all those. Hope to see you guys back next week.
And before we wrap, I don't feel like we have a true winner for this week because it's really hard to prove or disprove this. But I think that we can all agree that the one loser is Bob Lazar.
Okay. Well, hey, that's what I was gonna say. Was we have the science kind of had holes poked in it. But one thing that we can't really do is look at the video and say anything else. And when we have, eye account witnesses of people who have no reason to have any sort of, credibility issues. So it came out as kind of a tie. So, hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you guys learned some stuff. Hope you guys had some questions answered. We will see you guys next time. Until then, we're signing off. See y'all.